Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, the 4th District of Oklahoma, and this is another one of our weekly congressional chats. It's been a fairly busy week in Congress, and probably the most consequential single thing that moves through the floor on both sides at lightning speed. And when I say both sides, I mean both the House and the Senate. It's on the way to the President as we speak. Was a bill to prevent a possible railway strike. This is fairly controversial because, frankly, most of us don't like Congress intervening in private negotiations between workers and their employers. However, this is a power Congress has had since the 1920s because railroads are so essential to the operation of commerce. And if they're shut down for any length of period, the consequences are very great in terms of unemployment and economic loss. I voted in favor of preventing a possible strike on December 9th. I think it's the right thing to do, certainly in a state like ours, which is heavily dependent on rail traffic, certainly for moving agricultural products, moving industrial products, moving energy products in many cases. So I thought it was the right thing to do, and hopefully the negotiations can continue and the two parties can arrive at a fair outcome. But regardless, it's very important that the entire economy for the whole country not be shut down because of a dispute in a single industry, and that's what we were on the verge of. We passed three other pieces of legislation through the House this week. One is named after my late colleague Jackie Walorski, who did a lot of work in the area of child welfare and nutrition. This bill reflected that work. It was strongly bipartisan, as the original legislation was, and something she'd worked on and we felt was a fitting tribute to the terrific service that she rendered her district, her state, and our country in her career. She was a very good personal friend of mine and somebody that honestly I miss every day on the floor of the House. She was a wonderful, wonderful member. We moved two other pieces of legislation that were strongly bipartisan, I think good pieces of legislation. One, to provide additional support for incarcerated women who happen to be pregnant during the time of their incarceration. The second, to help people who have been incarcerated reintegrate into society, try to make sure they don't return to the habits that got them in trouble in the first place. We have some terrific people, by the way, that work in this area in Oklahoma. I visited one of the centers recently in South Oklahoma, or in Oklahoma City, and that actually helps incarcerated people get the training they need, formerly incarcerated, get the training they need, get an opportunity to get a job. It's money well spent and lives changed for the better. So, those things Congress actually did pretty well this week. Much of the week, though, was also consumed as each party organized for the next Congress. On the Republican side, this mostly was a matter of writing what are called conference rules. How will you govern yourself? And a number of changes were made in our traditional rules to empower individual members to be more effective. I think to make us a more responsive and probably more conservative Republican caucus. So I personally think those are good things. The rule changes were all things that I could support, but there were some vigorous debates. I mean, some things were considered that didn't happen, other things were considered that did, but again, by and large, I think a good outcome, one that hopefully will make a narrow and new majority on the Republican side more effective and more reflective of its membership. On the Democratic side, you really had a generational change in leadership. Speaker Pelosi announced last week that she would not be running to be leader of the Democratic caucus again. Two other long-standing Democratic officials, Steny Hoyer of Maryland, the majority leader, and Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, the majority whip, both stepped down from their respective positions. Hoyer will no longer be in leadership. Clyburn will be in a lesser role, really as a mentor figure and advisor at the Democratic leadership. Between them, those people had been there for almost 60 years. Hoyer and Speaker Pelosi took their respective positions as the top two Democrats in 2003. So literally, they'd been there essentially 20 years. late 2002, actually, in December elections. Um, they're being replaced by younger, very, very liberal members of Congress. The new Democratic leader will be Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn, New York, 52 years old, so quite a generational difference between him and Speaker Pelosi. The number two person will be Catherine Clark. She's a very liberal Democrat from the Boston area, somebody that I know. We served together on the Appropriations Committee and on my subcommittee, what's called the Labor H Subcommittee. Serious legislator, no doubt about it, but certainly well to the left of my views. And then another appropriator, Pete Aguilar from California, who I served with on a Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Again, very capable guy. So this is the new lineup for the Democrats, all of them considerably younger, and I'm sure they'll offer vigorous opposition to Republicans. Republican leadership has already been set. That was done last week by the Republicans. Kevin McCarthy is the Republican leader. Steve Scalise is the new majority leader. Tom Emmer, who led Republican efforts in the last election at the National Republican Congressional Committee, is the new whip. Elise Stefanik was conference chair in the last Congress and will remain that in this Congress. So each side has a pretty young, pretty vigorous, pretty capable leadership. It'll be interesting to see how they do in their respective jobs, but quite a change from the last Congress for sure. Finally, the two big items that no action on the floor happened, but I think there's been some significant movement on that Congress really needs to, in my view, finish before the end of the year. The first is called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. This is something we've gotten done for 61 straight years. It's usually very bipartisan. This is the bill that provides the blueprint for the American military of how we will spend the dollars and the things that we will accomplish. It's interesting to me that the NDAA is going to come in significantly above President Biden's budget. That means a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, as well as the Republicans of both chambers think the president's defense budget was simply too low, and it was in a very dangerous world. There may be other things attached to it, but I actually think it'll be a very strong bill. It'll be a very bipartisan bill, and we'll see. I expect that we may see that on the floor next week, literally. The other major item, which is actually more important, is the spending bills. And here, honestly, I'm very critical of the United States Senate as an institution, Democrats and Republicans alike. They haven't passed a single bill out of the Appropriations Committee in 2 years. Not a single bill. The House, by the way, had gotten all 12 bills out of committee, 6 of them across the floor. But then my friends in the Democratic majority just quit working, maybe because the Senate hadn't done anything, but mostly to focus on politics in the fall. And now they're scrambling, and we're going to be presented with probably one large single bill. My guess is Congress, which was due to adjourn on December the 16th, will have to be here for at least another week. I think you'll probably see that next week. The so-called continuing resolution that funds government will be extended by a week, and the effort will be underway to try and get a big deal. Now, again, this is not the preferred way of doing things. We should have multiple bills coming to the floor at different times that can get more attention. The question that Republicans in the House will likely be presented with, because they will need some votes on our side of the aisle, is it better to get all this business done this year and start clean next year, or is it better to kick this into next year? I tend to come down on let's finish our business and not push it into the new Congress. I think things will be considerably better next year with a Republican majority, and I think considerably more likely to move in regular order. But again, to be fair, this is not a House problem as much as it is a Senate problem. They just simply haven't done their work. They've been so busy passing these huge $1.9 trillion spending bills like the American Rescue Plan or $750 billion misnamed the Inflation Reduction Act in the late summer. They didn't do the basic work. and to again be negotiating at this stage when they haven't passed the bills out of their subcommittees or full committee, let alone across the floor, is just an outrageous way to do business. I have no idea what Republican leadership will decide as to whether or not, again, they want to come to a deal now or push it into next year. Politics probably complicates that decision, but we'll just have to play it. Oklahoma has a lot of interest, particularly military interest, in getting a deal done and getting a higher number than the president proposed. Again, we're typically pretty pro-defense in Oklahoma, and certainly in a district like mine where you have both Tinker Air Force Base and Fort Sill Army Post, which are, by the way, the two largest single-site employers in the state of Oklahoma. And that's civilians, not counting the military that work there. And all the various defense-related industries, particularly in aerospace that we have in Oklahoma. Those things are important to our economy, as are many of the other things. So again, we're going to look at it very carefully, and we'll come to a decision, but at least there's some movement beginning on both those areas. I'm very optimistic on the National Defense Authorization Act, but unless you get an omnibus and fund it, it really doesn't matter. I mean, saying how you're going to spend the money isn't actually spending the money. You have to appropriate it, and that's going to be a much more difficult issue, and one that we'll just have to play day by day as we try to negotiate it through. So with that, again, consequential, busy week in Congress, but the next two will probably be more important and more consequential, and there's still a lot of big decisions to be made and very little time to make them in. So with that, look forward to visiting with you next week.